everyone, my name is Merritt Murphy and this will be my chapter summary over chapter 5, Leadership and Power. So this chapter begins and they really start to heavily make the distinction between leadership and power and how they are not interchangeable and the different distinctions between both of those. So they start by saying we all have both varying opinions on power, and to some degree we all admire power, but we all also despise the corruption that can come with this power. So I do like how they pointed this out, because I think if this question was maybe asked to certain people, they would say they were really heavily on one side of the spectrum, without even realizing that maybe they would despise the corruption or even admire some of the power that comes with that. So to have that example I thought was really interesting. Going forward, they state that power and leadership are obviously interdependent upon one another. However, they are not interchangeable. While power can exist without leadership, leadership cannot exist without power. I think this is really important. This message sort of carries throughout the whole chapter, so I think it was really beneficial that it was really heavily stated at the beginning of this chapter. So they go on to define power as the ability to influence others. And they state that leadership is impossible without power, since a leader must modify attitudes as well as behaviors too. And then they go on to say that influencing also does not qualify as leadership, which I thought was interesting. Power must be used in pursuit of group goals to merit leadership classification. So this isn't something that I necessarily would have thought of before. And then go on to give a really good example that I liked. So they did use an example of how a bank robber, if he goes in and goes to rob a bank, of course, makes everybody get on the ground. He would exhibit power over everybody, but it isn't necessarily leadership, of course. He's not leading them to do a certain goal or anything. He just has power and control over them in that certain situation. His power was exercised only on behalf of his own interests. So again, I think that's interesting. There was no common group goal. Nobody else besides him, of course, benefited from that situation. So when you take this into consideration, of course, this is an extreme example, but thinking of it on people we might classify as leaders, if you kind of take those into consideration, I think that's beneficial in helping making that distinction. So Warren Bennis, he describes the relationship between power and leadership as power is the capacity to translate intention into reality and sustain it. Leadership is the wise use of this power. And I really did like that. And then he goes on to say that vision is the commodity of leaders and power is their currency. Again, this is really cool how he just kind of aligns those with certain things and makes that analogy. I think it helps people break that down and make it a little bit more clear as well. So going into some of the different sources of power. So the first one that the book discussed is coercive power. And coercive power is based on the ability to administer punishment or to give negative reinforcements. So this kind of power is the most effective when those subject are aware of the expectations and are warned in advance about penalties. So when I think of coercive power, I almost think about that like in almost a work setting. So I think that if people know like the penalties, of course, for example, coming to work late, they're more, obviously going to be able to come to work better, and they're more willing to do so if they, of course, know the penalties to coming work late. Now, if they didn't know that going in, they might not be as punctual. So I did like how they broke that down. So going on to the next type of power, this is the reward power. And that rests on the ability to deliver something of value to others. Now, this reward can be tangible, and that could be like money or good grades, they said, other things like that. or it can be intangible. And they describe this in the work setting as something like pride in the workplace. If you're really prideful and you want to do a really good job, that's something that can be a reward to some people. So I did like how they made that distinction, and I thought that was really interesting when they discussed that about reward power. So I don't have time to go through the rest of them, but I thought those two were really interesting, and I like they discussed those. So thank you so much for watching.